Hey everybody, welcome to our session on net neutrality. And I want to say a special shout out because we know we are going to have some people from the e-learning consortium of Colorado with us today also. So we're going to get started. Now this is an update for net neutrality, and this is our rapid responses to social issues and current events. And we are doing this through the ISTE Games and Sims Network. And here is our speaker panel. So I'm the person you can't see. Okay, Chris, go ahead and wave. Sherry, your turn waving. Okay, so now we'll go back to the slides. Okay, it is not February 27th today. It is February 23rd. But what we're going to be talking about is about February 27th, okay? So, February 27th, we will see. This is an activist group on the internet, and we are going for one more vote. And what do we mean by one more vote? Well, guess what? The net neutrality, our side didn't win, okay? Or I should say, the people who want the net neutrality rules repealed, the Federal Communications Commission is going to go ahead and do that. So there are some different groups out there that are looking for February 27th to be the hashtag one more vote. And what they mean by one more vote is they need one more senator to vote on this to be brought up with the Senate. So that's what they're trying for February 27th. But we are going to go ahead and we are going to give you a quick review on net neutrality and then, just a little bit more about what's going to happen on February 27th. So, Chris, are you ready to take it away?
I am ready. All right, so the first question that some of you may be asking, what is net neutrality? The idea behind net neutrality is simple. It's that everyone has equal access. Whether it doesn't matter what provider you use, it doesn't matter whether you're a big company, a small company, someone who has a basic connection to cable or a high-speed connection to cable. The idea is that you have equal content. That content is delivered to you as the user in an equitable fashion, and no one has preferences. So next slide. Some common terms that are coming up. The first one is bandwidth throttling. So it sounds exactly what it sounds like. It's choking your bandwidth. The idea is that some companies do have, your ISP providers do have the ability to slow down the way content is delivered to you. That's why sometimes during peak use time, peak use is the key word, when everyone's on the internet at the same time, is that you might get things delivered. It might take a while for things to pop up on your computer. So bandwidth throttling does happen. However, it is not something that was allowed under the previous net neutrality lanes. Other than fast lanes, something else that wasn't allowed is the idea that if you paid a premium service or if you were a premier provider of content, your stuff would be put in a faster lane and be able to deliver to your consumers faster than everybody else. So think of it as prioritization or the VIP lanes. So the idea is that if you paid for it, if you paid an extra fee for it, then you would get faster delivery. So that's what we mean by fast lanes. And of course, some of you have seen this one, blocking, especially if you're on public different campuses. Some sites may be blocked, but that's basically is that your providers could, in this new law, in this new age of things, block content that they wanted to. So for instance, Comcast could block access to another cable provider if they felt like it. So, and go on to the next slide.
Okay, so what is the FCC? We're going to do this really quickly. It's the Federal Communications Commission. There are 5 commissioners, okay? And they are appointed according to the political parties. So since there's a Republican president, there is now 3 Republican commissioners, and there are 2 Democratic commissioners. These are the people who make up the rules when it comes to the internet, and they don't always agree. Okay, this is one of the commissioners who, this was out in November, she was saying, I'm on the FCC, please stop us from killing net neutrality. Now, as you can guess, 5 with a 3-to-2 ratio, there's one side that's going to be able to vote it. Okay, now all of this about net neutrality, this has happened before, but our most recent one all started up in April 26th. And what it is it about the desire to reverse Title II. And we'll talk about Title II a bit more later, but the gist of it, the whole throttling and the bandwidth and the blocking, this if the internet service providers are not considered Title II common carriers, then they don't have to play by those rules. So now there's been a lot of controversy, okay? And I'm sorry to get into the alt facts and the fake news and stuff like that, but the two sides on the FCC have been fighting a bit. Okay, now one of the things that happened was that the FCC looked for comments, and there is a comment controversy. Okay, we'll get into a little more detail a little later, but the FCC commissioner comes out and claims that Title II hurts.
Oh, looks like Kay's mic went out there, but it hurts low-income, rural, and urban neighborhoods. And the idea is that it's accelerating the practice of redlining.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, cool. Okay, so basically what I was trying to say was there's a lot of controversy and you have to check your facts. One side of the FCC commission is claiming something, and then the other side of the FCC is claiming something different. Now, I'll be turning it over to Chris for net neutrality and businesses.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that when you hear arguments for removal of the repeal of net neutrality was, well, it's business. So first thing, ISPs, we talked about them before, internet service providers. So these are typically big businesses. So Comcast / Xfinity, Time Warner Cable, Verizon, AT&T, and then lots and lots of other ones that are out there. These are typically very, very large businesses. So there's definitely very much barriers to actually going ahead and to get into this. And so this slide goes ahead and shows you that these are some of the costs to consider. So think about this. So for an internet service provider, they're actually going ahead and have to lay cable, lay fiber optics, lay material out put it into the ground and run it up to the homes that actually service them. So it's very costly to enter, lots and lots of startup costs. It's capital intensive, very, very, very delayed return on investment. It may take a long time to recoup any of their costs. That's if they stay alive long enough. And there's lots of permitting and licensing. Why? Because most cities and counties don't like you digging up their roads to go ahead and put cable on. So you also have to make sure you hit all the standards and file out all the correct licenses and permits, and of course pay lots and lots of fees. Also, there's a legal aspect to this. There's also challenges that happen a lot whenever you have little startup ISPs, and it's a common practice for small players to be hit with frivolous, well, they call them frivolous lawsuits from bigger competitors. So it's one of the ways that it happens. And what it is typically saying that there isn't a demand, or they are encroaching upon their technology or doing different things like that. So a lot of it could be patent lawsuits, could be things about they're using trade secrets. It could be that they hired somebody from a larger company and that person had a non-disclosure agreement and they're suing them because of that. So there's lots of different ways that the bigger companies go ahead and try to increase the costs for the smaller companies. So the next slide.
Okay, Chris, I just wanted to ask you one question for clarification. Is
Sure.
What you're saying here is, because having read this, a lot of what the commissioners who are for the repeal are saying is that otherwise small companies can't start up and do their own internet service provider. What you're saying here is that it is a practice of the larger companies to sue the smaller companies when they try to get a foothold. Is that what you're saying? Yes,
because larger companies like to go ahead and keep their customers.
Okay. We just might be debunking just one of the things out there saying that you need it for small companies to start up. You have to repeal it for small companies. The small companies are going to have a hard time getting into the business because the big companies have enough resources to sue them, correct?
Yeah, the cost is also going to be very high. There's negligible cost. Net neutrality does not affect whether or not an ISP provider startup can actually start up or not. It's actually more based on how much cost they incur from existing competitors as well as the startup costs. So the other argument against net neutrality, the biggest one you hear, is that there's less incentive for businesses to upgrade systems and innovate. And the idea is that the internet's a common good. So since it's a common good, then there's no incentive for one company to invest in new technology, and there's no incentive for them to be a first mover to try out new technology or innovate. It's interesting because some of the material coming out is that most of the ISP providers are like, nope, that's not really something we even think about. So the other piece to it is that there's a two-tier system that's available. Oh, you can go back. The two-tier system was allowed. The idea would be that if there's a premium service, this is how they could capitalize on any additional costs that this innovation would occur. But most ISP providers, when they innovate, they spread the cost across all of their users. Next slide. And the idea here is that net neutrality for net neutrality is that the idea that there is no fast lanes, there's no differentiation of service, and everyone's content gets equal treatment as far as when it's delivered, how fast it's delivered, and things that to that nature. The idea is that both the small business startups will have a level playing field with big businesses, because in a non-net neutrality setup, the big businesses could afford the cost of purchasing high-speed access to deliver their content first, and it would be an additional startup cost that would be needed for small businesses, or additional burden for small business. The other piece here is that currently with net neutrality, the idea is that it's better that internet access and speed is a commodity. So that way, the idea is that it's driving prices down. The idea is, in a commodity system, that a provider is better off being more efficient in the delivery of their service, in this case, internet. So delivering faster internet at a lower cost would be a more competitive advantage in the current system, the past system of net neutrality. So these are cases for net neutrality.
Okay, so quite what Chris was talking about. All of this relates to Title II classification. So when they say the net neutrality repeal, they're talking about taking it away from considering it a public good. And this common carrier classification really it goes back to things like the electrical company. What the phone company used to be like 30 years ago, where everything, and as you should be able to see on this graphic here, is that everything, we were allowed access to everything. There's nothing stopping the public, if they're willing to pay that fee, just like not stopping the public from having water, not stopping the public from having electricity. Now, if you went ahead and you repeal, which is what they said that they will be doing, is that you then change it to like that sliding scale, kind of like we have with phones. So everything's a different package. You might have to pay for things. You might have things blocked. Your different services would allow for different things, and that's what they mean by the Title II carrier. Now, the three rules of net neutrality, because of this Title II, it allows that websites don't get blocked. I mean, other than, say, your university deciding to block something, but the service provider doesn't do it. No bandwidth throttling, like, them deciding that at a certain time they're not going to allow that. Or if you're listening to Pandora Music or Netflix, they're going to throttle it, okay? And no paid prioritization. So you don't have to pay more money to get into that fast lane and have faster internet than somebody else. So they can't differentiate among customers. So this is a paid prioritization. This is an example of what Comcast said before, before April 26th. This is what they said. They said it was, they were really all encompassing, and they said, hey, if you do this, we're always going to have this. And then when it looked like the FCC would vote against it, their pledge changed. There's a lot less wording in it, and they're promising a lot less. Okay, so now we are going to go ahead and we're going to turn it over to Chris. He's going to talk for a little bit, and then Sherry is going to give us some scenarios. So, Chris, go ahead and take it away.
Sure. So the impact of net neutrality repeal on educators. So what might be the effect on educators? Well, first of all, we get slogans. So you see here one of the flags that's out there. And then the other thing we have is there's some different questions that pop up. So for those of us who are digital educators, how does that affect us when it comes to choosing resources or delivering our resources? So remember, if we're not, as an educational institution, paying for the high-speed access of delivery, then how is our content going to be delivered? Is it going to be too slow? How does that affect whether or not we include video, or what type of content we want to stream or we want to deliver to our students? Other piece there is, what does this mean to us as educators who teach online? So that's something we have to talk about ourselves. Do you have synchronous sessions that use a device like Hangout or WebEx? Well, that requires the internet. So therefore, and that even works for face-to-face classes as well, is if you're using any sort of distance learning tool, the fact that you have to use the internet, there could be an issue if you're not paying that premium service. And as we all know, education budgets are a great concern to most educators. So the next slide shows an interesting graphic. And this graphic shows you the coverage that's out there in based on internet access throughout the US. So what you see here is the gray areas in the US are places that are not considered an educational desert. What it means that is there's lots and lots of educational institutional options for people who live in these regions. So those are the gray areas. The blue areas are a physical education desert, which means that there's not an educational institution within a couple mile radius of where the individual lives. So all that blue means there is no physical institution that makes it an easy drive for our students to reach an area of higher education. Excuse me. And then what you have is you have the yellow, the little blips of yellow that are there, and that means that it's an online educational desert, which means that there's not necessarily any online service being provided to those areas, but there is physical education that's there. So in other words, they don't have the online option, they just have the face-to-face option. And the pockets of green that you see there, these are typically the most isolated places in the US. And what that means in green means that there is neither an online or a physical educational option for individuals living in those areas, in those big green splashes that are there, which means that they're not provided any face-to-face higher educational coverage, nor do they have access to any online offerings through their local pieces. Now again, there are MOOCs, there are setups here, but the other thing you see here is also the internet could be so poor that it's not a reliable service for individuals living in those areas. So online is not necessarily an option for them. So that's something to keep in mind. And then next up, loot box. Just a wonderful picture of loot boxes. Of course, we all love that. But the idea is that you can go ahead as educators, this is what we want to see whenever we open up our LMSs, that we get commercials to be able to get our premium service. So there's different things to think about.
Well, and the other thing about this, I think this was specially developed for, like, what if net neutrality is repealed and you go ahead and you're opening up your internet service provider. It's, well, what options are you going to go? Okay, I open it up. Well, I want unlimited tweets for 30 minutes. So I click on there and I buy them. Like it was like, look, get another, buy another loot box. So, I mean, what they're saying, and I will tell you, I believe that this was based on a graphic over in from Portugal, and Portugal deals with some of this. I mean, you have to buy how much access you're going to have to have for Facebook. Think about what that would be like. And the other thing I would say is I know a lot of online instructors, you keep your online courses just up. You're at home. Even if you're working another job in the evenings, you pull up, D2L and you pull up the courses and you're doing other things and you go back and you work on it a little. But think about that. Even your work style might have to change because you might be going, hey, I can't have all these things up at the same time. Okay, what we're going to do now is Sherry is going to have us look at some actual scenarios, some scenarios that she went ahead and developed. So go ahead, Sherry, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Kay. So I want to add a little bit to what Chris said earlier. And we talked about the impact that net neutrality could have on educators. But the other flip side of that is obviously students would be impacted by that. And I can think of the scenario where I'm worried about how many minutes I have to be on the internet or how many minutes it's allowed for me to be on the internet. That would affect my ability to access courses as well. That's pretty scary.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And think about it. We're just starting, and I mean, starting to incorporate much more video in online classes. Would it be a total step backwards? And especially since we work at community colleges, our students aren't necessarily going to have lots of extra funding to be able to budget for extra internet costs.
Right.
Well, the other piece to it would also be from an adjunct perspective is that and even full-time instructors that teach online would there need to be an adjustment in the pay scale to ensure that they compensate for the amount of time that these instructors had to pay for additional connection to be able to access their classes and instruct.
That's a very good point, Chris. Hope that taken into consideration. Okay, so my little section is my concern because, from an educator perspective, I am very worried about how net neutrality will affect academic research. So I listed out 6 nightmare scenarios that give me nightmares, okay, about what will happen when we have net neutrality repealed. So the first scenario is that, thank you. So the first scenario is when the big publisher had to pay SEO for their scholarly publication. So SEO is search engine optimization. That is when a business pay for their website to be shown toward the top of a search engine. So if you imagine that if net neutrality is repealed, now big publishers have to be able to pay, right, to get their listing, their publication, their article toward the top of the search engine. But smaller publishers probably would drop off the face of the earth, at least in terms of search engine, because they're going to be on the 20th or 30th page on Google. So we'll never really access them, because we all know that students usually click on the first few articles anyway on a search engine, even via Google Scholar or google.com. That's what they're going to look for. So that is a problem where quality research might disappear from the front of the page simply because their publisher cannot pay or afford the SEO that they have to pay for publication. So next, go back. Thank you. So I brought in an example from Google Scholar to show you what would happen in this scenario. So for scholars, we know that scholars right now thrive, right? Especially when you're trying to get tenure as an educator. You survive on the scholarship or the impact of your scholarship publications. So on Google Scholar, how it's indicated on the impact, the influence of your scholarship is based on how many people cite your article. So I decided to type net neutrality because that was fun. And I saw that the first article that popped up is the economics of net neutrality. And notice that it's cited by 189 people, and it goes down. So the one that are cited the most and also have relevant keywords show up on the top of Google Scholar. But what if the citation no longer matters? It's about who which big publisher you're able to publish your article. So if you publish to a smaller academic article, or a publisher, or maybe as a humanities-based publisher rather than, for example, a science-based publisher, then maybe your article would not appear toward the front of Google Scholar. And that means you have less impact through your publication. So next. Okay, so second scenario that give me nightmares. So corporate sponsored scholarly publications. So we know, I mean, my passion in academia, my reason for being in academia is because I love to research on the topic I want to research on, and I want to write documents and write publications on the topic I want to research on. And I don't want to put bias into my article. But what if I can no longer afford to publish, okay? And the only way I can get my publication out there for people to see is that I have corporate backing on my publication. So I said, what if faculty succumbing to the pressure having to demonstrate that their publication has impact, so in other words, that their listings show up on the top of Google Scholar, for example, seek corporate sponsorship to push up their listing on the search engine to be cited more often. That's a problem. I think we can see that there could be bias that is surfacing in our article. And not only that, if corporations sponsor my publication, you can imagine that they might have impact or influence over what I write. That's a problem. So next. Okay, yeah. There you go. Brought to you by Verizon. I don't like that feeling. I think that could happen.
I know. But I mean, what you're talking about is something, because if there's pay prioritization, if sites can be blocked, if things can be, not so much the throttling, but the paid prioritization and the blocking, this is something that could be bought.
Absolutely. And imagine whose voice would be heard is the people who have money backing their voices, not because it's objective and that we get to hear a wide range of scholarship, but who gets sponsored more. That's a problem. Yes. We go next. Okay, here's a third nightmare. Less credible articles will be cited. Well, naturally, let's say we're going by the first and second premise, okay, that maybe scholarship that's been pushed up to the top are corporate sponsored, or that they are backed by big publishers. That doesn't mean that they're more credible, okay? So maybe less credible articles show up on the top, and we know that students don't really know how to evaluate articles, or that many of them will say, well, I found this article through Google Scholar. It must be credible. There's no bias. There's nothing inside that article. So they'll cite whatever that shows up on the top. And that means that naturally, one of the natural or possible outcome is that less credible articles can get cited. And that's uncomforting, especially when we are already battling with students writing papers that might not be all that credible or have strong ethos within them. Next. Yeah. So I offered this as a scenario. Back in the day, there was an article on autism study that has now been discredited, right? The autism study that linked with the vaccine shots, right? The vaccine shots causes autism. That research has been debunked a long time ago. But what if this article shows up on the top because it is corporate sponsored, okay? Or politically sponsored. I don't like that feeling, but this is a scenario that is coming up in my head. So next, please. Okay, so nightmare 4. There's lots of nightmares. Nightmare 4. Inaccessible educational websites due to bandwidth throttling. We've been talking in our group, at least, and of course through our ELK group and through many of our colleges, we've been talking about open educational resources. And we've been thinking about implementing open educational resources. But we also know that OER are often on websites that might not be on big publisher sites. Sometimes educators, right, publish material on different sites, and hopefully for contributing to our knowledge, we can use keywords to find their material. But what if everything is based on corporate sponsorship or big publisher or money, and publishers such as myself, I will admit that, educators such as myself, when I have money to boost my website toward the top? What if my website disappeared? Or because it's been, your bandwidth is throttled when you go to my site because it's not sponsored by big publisher. That's a problem. So we can go next. So I use my own website as an example. I have a little blog and I call it Reflections on Online Teaching and Learning. I just use it as a diary to reflect on my own online teaching practices. I know that I don't have a lot of readers, but I certainly want anyone who wants to be able to read my thoughts to be able to access it. But because I don't have the big money like a big publisher, maybe in the future, my site will not even be accessible to you, or that it will be throttled because I'm not published on a big publisher site. So my site will disappear. Even if you think the content is not good enough for your research, I hope that someone who finds it valuable should be able to access it. So next. Okay, the fifth one. Scholarly articles that challenge political and corporate interests become blocked or censored. Natural progression. Okay, natural progression from the original thought. So if there's corporate sponsorship, we know that there could be interest-driven scholarship. Okay, and interest-driven scholarship is a nice way of saying maybe censored scholarship. There are certain topics I can say, and there are certain topics I cannot research on. So that means some of our stuff might be censored or blocked. What if I said something, right, that's against my publisher, or something that might go against the interest of the corporation that backed my research? That's a big concern. There should not be a contamination of corporate interest on educational resources. There's a good reason why, but this is a possible scenario. So next. Oop. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, maybe we're stuck. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay.
See, they're doing it to us. They're doing it to us.
Yeah, that's our claim. That might be happening already. Okay, so I use this as an example, okay? This is an article from Scientific American, okay? And the article is titled "Government Scientists Blocked from Talking About Climate and Wildfires." I mean, this is happening now. Government scientists are being censored. And underneath where it says in the punchline, critics are accusing the Trump administration of stifling the dissemination of taxpayer-funded science. And I just interchange that with corporate-funded science. And we know how that could turn out. If we think about, if I'm worried about my discipline, which is in philosophy, naturally sciences could be affected too, and all other disciplines could be affected by corporate sponsorship. So please go next. Okay, sixth scenario. Last one. This is not all my nightmares, but these are the big six, okay, in my nightmares.
It's enough nightmares for us. It's enough.
Okay, I get the point across. It's not good, okay? News articles by biased major news organization appear on the front page of search engines. So in my own courses, I don't just tell students to go do research, conduct research for peer review articles. I want students to interact with current events. And the way you get students to interact or read current events is to actually look for news articles, okay? Currently, when students search for news articles, it's not going to be always the big corporation that show up on the front page. At least they can sort through, and there'll be smaller publication that could show on the front page. But what if everything, again, is that money-driven SEO, right? That everything is the websites only show up because they're corporate backed or big publisher backed. Maybe those news articles that we find valuable will no longer appear. Maybe their agenda does not align with the corporation or the publisher. So I think some of our articles, or especially indie publishers, indie news articles or publications, will disappear. And that's not good news, at least for me and my students. It's just not good. So next, yeah. So yeah, this is not fair. This is not fair. Okay, I type Fox News. Okay, so naturally, just as a scenario, imagine that we search anything and it's Fox News, Fox News. Yes. And Kay, we're gonna say.
Oh no, that's good. And I'm just gonna mention this. I know last time we did this, we went into much more detail, but The thing that Sherry is doing with all the scenarios, look, we do need public voices. In fact, this whole thing about net neutrality, there's a huge controversy about the amount of comments that actually were out there. Okay, so the Attorney General of New York, Eric Schneiderman, is actually suing because his office analyzed the comments about the FCC and net neutrality and found that hundreds of thousands of Americans were impersonated to drown out real people in businesses. Okay? And the reason why he's investigating this is because doing that in the state of New York for anybody who is a citizen of New York and whose name was put on there, that's considered identity fraud. So he has jurisdiction to go ahead and look at this. So while Sherry is talking about scenarios, we already have a nightmare scenario here, okay? And we can link this back to we don't know if it's Russian trolling. We don't know if it's political. We don't know where it is, but these kind of scenarios do happen. So everything that Sherry was talking about might be a little mild compared to like this, thing that showed up. And then if you'd like to put your name in because you found that you were on the list or your dead father, this actually happened, was on the list, you can go ahead and do that. Now we're going to turn to Sherry because she has some ideas about next steps and actions on net neutrality.
Okay. Thank you, Kay. So I am not one to just act as a chicken with my head cut off and just freak out over my nightmares because that's just a pessimistic view of the future. So I think that's also healthy to talk about maybe possible solutions. This might not be the only solution, but I think it's a very possible one, okay? I really do see blockchain technology as a possible solution for democratic dissemination of information. We know from blockchain technology, without going too much into the technical details about how it works, but the idea is that information that's saved on blockchain, every single piece of information that's saved on a blockchain technology is saved permanently. At least we know who posted it, what time it was posted, who was it posted in response to what articles and so forth. So if we're able to use blockchain to connect the internet, save the internet, that's one way for us to maintain information. No, it probably cannot stop bandwidth throttling, but at least we are able to trace the source of that information without anyone cutting us off or making it inaccessible for us, because everything will have a paper trail, a digital paper trail. So I really think that blockchain could be one possible solution to promote free speech, make sure our democracy stay intact. And here's already an op-ed, an opinion piece on how blockchain technology can revolutionize e-democracy. So this conversation is not exactly completely new. It's now in the ether. So people are talking about, okay, companies, okay, small businesses, can we think of ways to use blockchain in various different ways to protect our information, because we are starting to see a cascade of information disappearing due to corporate interests or publisher interests and so forth. Money is playing a big role in making information disappear. So turning back to Kay.
Okay, so now we're going to be, so we did that whole overview. Now we're going ahead and we're going to, we're going to take you now to February 27th, okay? This is next Monday. This is the next part of the internet getting organized. And so if you go on Twitter, if you go on your other social media feeds, look for the one more vote. At the very least, I'm sure they will come up with some crazy, wild, and interesting graphics to put out there. Now, what's happening with the one more vote is they're trying to get one more Republican to vote with the Democrats so this could be brought up in Congress. Now, the bill would have to be brought up in the Senate. It would have to be passed. It'd have to be passed by the House, and the president needs to sign it. And if it's vetoed, you'd need the Congress to go ahead and override it. Okay? So there's a lot going on here, and it's not going to all happen on February 27th, but it's one step. And now what I'm showing you is from the One More Vote website. Just Google hashtag One More Vote. the cool thing about it is that they give you lots of information how the Congressional Review Act works. And it's this Congressional Review Act that would look at net neutrality and would look at putting the internet as a Title II character. And then what I want to show you here was also some great things from this group. First of all, this okay, so this image, they are encouraging everyone to grab this image, put it on your Twitter, put it on Facebook, put it on your feed, and just get it out there, right? Keep the internet weird. Defend net neutrality. and Chris just typed, who does not like a fire-breathing unicorn? Exactly. Okay. But the thing about it is, think about all the crazy, weird stuff that happens on the internet. It's because people have access to the internet and to other technology tools so they can do the crazy, weird things like you're seeing there. Okay, now the groups that are organizing One More Vote, they have also gone ahead and they've developed display alerts. They have gone and done some coding. You can put things on your sites. They are asking you to contact Congress. Okay, again, they are suggesting you share any of these images on whatever social media sites you have, and then I'm just throwing a crazy one in at the very end. Okay, so what other options do we have? Well, we can build our own internet, right? It is being done. When Chris was talking about those online deserts, there are exactly in those places that I think they were in yellow or they were in green. Okay, so the Tribal Digital Village, Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association,
Oh, looks like Kay cut out again. So they went ahead and they put 350 miles of point-to-point access for their individuals.
Okay, if you can hear me, I'm talking about analog TVs. You can hear me.
You're
okay.
back.
Okay, so from the analog TV channels, they're using the white spaces to get creative. So I guess what we're saying here is we wanted to bring up the point again. What is net neutrality? What's going on? What's happening? How do we and Chris just sent something. It said, "Keep Kay's computer weird" is the next slogan. Thank you very much for typing that in, Chris. But what I was going to say is we wanted you to know, if you started to see the hashtag One More Vote, that people are still fighting for net neutrality. They are trying to push it through Congress. It might not be getting the most publicity, but for us as online educators, we want the internet weird. Guess what? We also don't want to be throttled. We don't want our faculty or our adjuncts or our students to have to pay more to get access to certain sites. We don't want, we don't want information blocked. We don't want education blocked. We don't want students having to count, I can only afford to go in my online class for this many minutes, okay? And it is access, and it is about digital equity, and that's pretty much where we're going to end. Thank you again to Games and Simulation Network. And that's all we have. So I would say to everybody, you should say goodbye. And thank you very much for eLearning Consortium of Colorado for joining us today. So keep the internet weird, and thank you very much. Bye.